New York budget crisis. Overspending puts NYC at risk as Watchdog sounds alarm. Massive city and state budgets are under fire as a fiscal watchdog group warns that New York City and state are in a precarious position, facing unaffordable and unprepared financial futures. According to the Citizen Budget Commission, CBC, both budgets are at risk in the shadow of an impending recession and potential federal funding cuts. The CBC has sounded the alarm on overspending, suggesting that our current financial path is not sustainable. The CBC, a nonpartisan watchdog, has made several recommendations to address the financial crisis. Among them is the elimination of Governor Kathy Hochul's proposed $2 billion inflation reduction checks for next year's state budget, which has ballooned to a record high of $254 billion. This move is sure to spark debate among those who believe such checks are necessary to support residents in tough economic times. Moreover, the CBC has criticized mayoral frontrunner Zohran Mamdani's plan to raise taxes on the wealthy and businesses to fund an ambitious $10 billion spending platform. The CBC's stance raises the question, should we rely on tax hikes to fund social programs, or are there better ways to allocate resources? Anna Ciampini, the CBC's vice president for research, put it simply, we should not raid rainy day funds and we should hold the line on taxes. But is this easier said than done? The CBC's briefing highlights that neither the state's nor the city's budgets are adequately prepared for future financial challenges. The city's near $116 billion budget is particularly concerning, as it lacks sufficient reserves to cover its ambitious spending plans. The CBC warns that the next mayor will have to close a $6 to $8 billion budget gap within just 16 days of taking office due to under-budgeting and overspending. At the state level, the CBC points out a structural budget gap of nearly $22 billion, which could worsen due to federal cuts. Patrick Oriki, the CBC's state policy director, sums up the situation. The real finding with this budget, at the state level, is that it spends too much and prepares too little for the future. But here's the kicker. Governor Hochul claims to be fiscally prudent by reducing her free check handouts. Is this a genuine effort to save money, or just a political maneuver? Hochul, who is up for re-election next year, has publicly opposed tax hikes, but her budget director, Blake Washington, has left the door open to tax increases to cover potential spending shortfalls. This raises the question, should we raise taxes to fund government programs, or are there other solutions to our financial woes? What do you think? Is our city and state budgeting on the right track, or are we heading for a financial disaster? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Millions of New Yorkers at risk of losing health insurance. Imagine waking up to the news that your health insurance could vanish overnight. That's the stark reality facing millions of New Yorkers as the repercussions of President Donald Trump's recently enacted One Big Beautiful Bill Act begin to unfold. Governor Kathy Hochul has issued a dire warning. The legislation is poised to slash $3 billion from New York's healthcare system, potentially leaving over 2 million residents without their current coverage. Among those at risk, an estimated 1.3 million could lose access to Medicaid due to new eligibility requirements and verification hurdles included in the law. Why this matters? The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, signed into law by Trump on July 4th, includes controversial provisions that target Medicaid. New York, which runs one of the largest Medicaid programs in the country, is particularly vulnerable to these cuts. But here's where it gets controversial. While the federal government aims to reduce healthcare spending by $1.1 trillion over the next decade, the state of New York is left to grapple with the fallout. What you need to know. On Thursday, Governor Hochul convened a cabinet meeting to outline the sweeping consequences of the newly signed legislation. The governor warned that millions of New Yorkers could lose not only their health coverage but also their food assistance, while the state's finances face strain for years to come. According to new estimates from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the bill will result in 11.8 million people losing Medicaid health insurance over the next decade. One of the most consequential elements of the federal law restricts which immigrant populations qualify for Medicaid coverage under the Essential Plan. Only green card holders and immigrants from a limited list of countries, including Cuba, Haiti, and some Pacific Island nations, will remain eligible. In New York, the governor warned, the changes could be especially devastating. The change is expected to strip coverage from about 500,000 immigrants in New York, leaving the state with an estimated $3 billion annual bill if it opts to maintain their insurance. Hochul said the administration was evaluating a potential legislative response in light of a 2001 state court ruling that requires the state to provide Medicaid coverage to some immigrants excluded from federal programs. We're having discussions now internally, but also will be engaging the leaders of the legislature during this time, she said. Hochul also warned that the federal healthcare cuts would hit rural hospitals especially hard. Most of our state is rural, she said. If we start closing these hospitals, you'll have to drive great distances. And that's dangerous. Although the governor said her team anticipated some federal cuts, prompting a $400 billion reduction in projected state spending and the downsizing of a planned inflation rebate from $300 million to $200 million. The scope of the new law exceeds what the state had prepared for. Like Medicaid, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, is also set to undergo funding changes. Under the new law, the federal government plans to continue funding SNAP, but states now have to share some of the cost if their payment error rate is 6% or higher, beginning in 2028, 2 years after the next midterm elections. Beginning in October 2027, New York would be required to fund 15% of all SNAP benefits, a projected $1.2 billion annual cost. At the same time, the federal government's share would drop from 50% to 25%. The state would have to pay an additional $36 million annually, while counties and New York City would shoulder an extra $168 million. According to New York officials, up to 3 million residents may see their food benefits jeopardized as a result of the changes. Hochul has also said the bill will cost New York $750 million this year and $3 billion next year alone. What people are saying. New York Governor Kathy Hochul said in a news release on Thursday, while Republicans in Washington callously slash funding for vital programs across the country, my administration is standing up for New Yorkers to soften the blow of these cuts amidst an affordability crisis. President Trump's devastating Big Ugly Bill will inflict harm across the state, leaving detrimental gaps in funding and families without the crucial benefits and coverage that they need. New York State remains laser-focused on ensuring New Yorkers have access to resources and support necessary to uplift them and their families. What happens next? Medicaid's funding changes under the new law are not scheduled to take effect until 2028. But this is the part most people miss. The impact of these changes will be felt long before then, as states scramble to prepare for the impending cuts. And this is where the controversy lies. Should states be forced to bear the brunt of federal budget cuts? Or is there a more equitable way to distribute the financial burden? Newsweek is committed to journalism that's factual and fair. Hold us accountable and submit your rating of this article on the meter. About the writer. Martha McHardy is a U.S. news reporter based in London, UK. Her focus is on polling and California politics. She has covered U.S. news extensively, including the 2024 election and pro-Palestine protests at U.S. colleges. Martha joined Newsweek in 2024 from The Independent and had previously freelanced at The Sun, The Mirror, and My London. She is a graduate of Durham University and did her NCTJ at News Associates. You can get in touch with Martha by emailing m.mchardy@newsweek.com. Languages: English. Martha McHardy is a U.S. news reporter based in London, UK. Her focus is on polling and California politics. She has covered U.S. news extensively, including the 2024 election and pro-Palestine protests at U.S. colleges. Martha joined Newsweek in 2024 from The Independent and had previously freelanced at The Sun, The Mirror, and My London. She is a graduate of Durham University and did her NCTJ at News Associates. You can get in touch with Martha by emailing m.mchardy@newsweek.com. Languages: English. One Big Beautiful Bill. How Trump's tax law puts New York Medicaid and SNAP at risk. Here's a hard truth. A single piece of legislation can reshape the lives of millions, for better or worse. And that's exactly what's happening in New York with the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, OBBB, signed into law by President Donald Trump on July 4th. While supporters hail it as a job-saving, economy-boosting triumph, critics, including New York's Democratic leaders, call it a big ugly bill that threatens to dismantle the state's healthcare and food assistance programs. But here's where it gets controversial. Is this bill a lifeline for the economy or a wrecking ball for the most vulnerable? Let's dive in. The promise of prosperity. New York's Republican leaders argue the OBBB is a game-changer. By extending tax cuts from the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they claim it will protect jobs, boost take-home pay, and provide much-needed tax relief for families. Congressmember Nick Langworthy, for instance, asserts the bill safeguards 405,000 full-time jobs in the state and could increase take-home pay by up to $11,700. The White House and the Council of Economic Advisors back this up, predicting wage increases of $4,400 to $8,000 over the next 4 years. And this is the part most people miss. The bill also eliminates taxes on tips for about 5% of New York's workers and removes taxes on overtime pay for 22% of overtime workers. Additionally, 3.3 million seniors could benefit from tax-free Social Security income. A key win for New York's Republican caucus is the increase in the state and local tax, SALT, deduction cap, raised from $10,000 to $40,000 for households earning up to $500,000. This change means families in districts like Congressmember Nick Lalata's could keep nearly $5,000 more per year. Lalata also highlights the bill's effort to close the Medicaid provider tax loophole, which he says will stabilize the program long-term. The looming crisis. But here's the flip side. Opponents argue the OBBB disproportionately benefits the wealthy while gutting New York's social safety net. Governor Kathy Hochul calls it a horrible assault on American values, warning it could cost the state's healthcare system nearly $13 billion annually. The Fiscal Policy Institute, FPI, estimates the bill will directly cost New York $10 billion per year, with an additional $13 billion from indirect effects. One major concern? The Essential Plan, a Medicaid-like program for low-income individuals, faces a $2.7 billion annual funding gap because the bill makes non-citizens ineligible for federal support. This could force 500,000 people into state-funded Medicaid and leave 224,000 without coverage. New requirements for Medicaid recipients, set to take effect in 2027, mandate 80 hours of monthly community engagement for able-bodied adults. Critics like Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins argue this will push tens of thousands off food assistance, not because they're unwilling to work, but because of overwhelming paperwork. She calls the bill an assault on working families, adding, "Every single New York Republican in Congress voted yes. They chose their party over their people." The bigger picture. The OBBB also shifts the cost burden of SNAP benefits onto states for the first time, potentially costing New York up to $1.4 billion annually. Meanwhile, the federal share of SNAP administrative costs drops from 50% to 25% in 2026, further straining state and local budgets. The Citizens Budget Commission, CBC, warns that neither New York State nor New York City is prepared for these cuts, especially with rainy day reserves down by $7 billion from last year. The debate rages on. While Republicans tout benefits like no taxes on car loan interest, enhanced opportunity zones, and $50 billion for rural hospitals, Democrats and fiscal watchdogs paint a dire picture. FPI's analysis shows that of the $570 billion in tax cuts for 2027, nearly $400 billion goes to the top 20% of earners. New York households earning over $1 million could see an average annual benefit of $80,000. But is this fair? Or is it, as Governor Hochul puts it, a bill that screws everybody else? The counterpoint. Assembly Minority Leader Will Barkley challenges this narrative, arguing that New York's $125.8 billion Medicaid program has become bloated and unsustainable. He contends the OBBB forces fiscal responsibility and that verifying eligibility for taxpayer-funded programs is entirely appropriate. There's nothing unfair about setting basic expectations, he says, criticizing Hochul's scare tactic roadshow. The question for you: is the OBBB a necessary economic boost or a dangerous gamble with the well-being of millions? Does it protect jobs and families, or does it dismantle critical safety nets? Share your thoughts in the comments. This is one debate where every voice matters.